Welcome to Beyond the Powerline Road. Hope we're all having a wonderful day and hope everything is going well. I am reflecting back to about 7 years ago, somewhere around 2017, 2018. A gentleman in my church by the name of Rex wanted me to get in the lineup to have sermons on a monthly basis in the evening. And so I wound up doing so, and my very first sermon dealt with 2 Kings chapter 5, and it dealt with the servant girl and Naaman. But now I am reflecting back at 2 Kings chapter 5, and I find very often that as I'm going through, I'm gleaning more and more information from 2 Kings chapter 5, and I will have to tell you, I have to confess this, I think 2 Kings chapter 5 is probably my favorite chapter in the Old Testament. It has so much to gather and so much information, and where does it occur historically? It occurs about 850 years before Christ. And in the timeline, if you look at it, Ahab is dead, and Elijah has already ascended to heaven in a fiery chariot. And Jehoshaphat and Jehoram are kings of Judah and Israel. And Naaman was one of 32 captains of the Syrian army, and this isn't about Naaman. And Ben-Hadad, too, was the king of Syria. And Elisha was the chief prophet. And Elisha, if you remember, was given twice the helping, if you will, of abilities because he had asked that from Elijah before Elijah left. And Elisha was an amazing prophet. He was able to do so many things. And in this particular story, we're going to look at him, but we're going to look at his servant. We're looking at the man that was with him for so many years, and his name is Gehazi. And I am struggling with the pronunciation. I have listened to the pronunciation, and they say, there's different ways to pronounce his name. But for all practical purposes, it is Gehazi. And I will probably call him Gehazi halfway through this thing, but Gehazi. And Gehazi was probably a young man when he started following Elisha. So I'm going to start where we first run into him, which is chapter 4 in 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8. It says, "One day Elisha went to Shunem, and there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat bread. So it was that as often as he passed by, he turned to there to eat bread. And she said to her husband, 'See now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, who passes us continuously. Please let us make a little room on the roof. Let's set a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp, stand for him to be there. When he comes, he can stay there.' Now the Shunammite woman was probably a woman of substance, and her husband provided for Elijah's needs as he traveled to and from the area. Shunem is a little village. It's a little village that is in the valley of Jeriel, and it's a fertile area, and it has probably less than a day's walk from Mount Carmel. So Elijah, with gratitude, would seek to provide a gift of kindness in return to this woman's generosity. And his servant, Gehazi, knows the heart of the woman and tells Elijah that she desires a family. Continuing in 2 Kings chapter 4, and in verse 14, and he said, this is Elisha asking Gehazi, "What then is there to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Verily she has no children, and her husband is old." So we're likely familiar with the rest of the story, but it shows that Gehazi was a servant that Elisha trusted. So often we see individuals like Gehazi that provide us inspiration, and they have the appearance of good and faithful servants. Then they do something incredibly unwise, and we lose faith in them. And we must be willing to forgive and forget those things that our brothers do, because very much like us, they are human. Now, Gehazi, if we were to look, and 2 Kings chapter 5 is not really put in chronological order. But as you know, the Shunammite woman, her son dies as he was working in the field with the father. And it probably occurred when the son was 5, 6, 7, 8, not likely 12 years old, because he was able to be lifted up and carried fairly well. So I'm thinking it was probably a young child working with his father in the field. And, of course, Elisha cured him or brought him back to life. And then later on in chapter 8, we see this young man again. And, of course, there is a famine between chapter 4 and chapter 8. And there is starvation between chapter 4 and chapter 8. And Elisha tells the Shunammite woman and her family to leave the area, to leave for 7 years and come back when the famine is over. So chapter 8, verse 4 says, Then the king talked to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, please, all the great things Elisha has done. Now it happened when he was telling the king about how he restored the dead to life, that there was a woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So, sure enough, the woman has been still there in the picture of Elijah's life, and he took care of her and her son. Very likely in those 7 years when she was gone, her husband probably passed away. But the son was there to petition to get her land back because she was gone for 7 years. So the reason I bring this up is because Gehazi has been with Elisha for 12, 13 years. He was a servant. He probably had a family, but his employment with Elisha, he had seen one miracle after another. He was an outspoken proponent of Elisha. He was an outspoken proponent of God. And then he does something really, really stupid. So if you go back to 2 Kings chapter 5, and of course it's the story of Naaman, and Naaman being cured of his leprosy, and Elisha says to Naaman, who Naaman had brought gold and silver and changes of clothes and everything else to pay as he felt he needed to, and Elisha said, You owe nothing, go your own way. So if we continue on, 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 19, Elisha said to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, Behold, my master has spared Naaman the Syrian in not receiving at his hand of which he had brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And he says, all is well. My master sent me, saying, Behold, even now there comes to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garment. Now, there is not a lie here. The sons of prophets had come to stay with Elijah. Matter of fact, if you go into the next chapter, of chapter 5, chapter 6, one of the sons of prophets had lost his axe handle in the water, and Elijah retrieved it from him. And then the sons of prophets were trying to build a place a little bit larger for them because staying in Elijah's small abode was a little too small. So what happened here? Gehazi truly decided to do something on his own. Was it greed? Was it simply an opportunity to provide clothing for two individuals that were staying with Elisha? Did he see an opportunity and take it? So we find that those individuals could possibly be clothed from Naaman's materials they bought. There could be money to build things, and Gehazi opted to do this. Now, the sad part of all this is that when Naaman did wind up giving Gehazi the talents, and if we go to verse 23, he says, Naaman said, "Be content, take 2 talents. And he urged him and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bore them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hands and bestowed them in the house, and he let the men go, and they departed." Interestingly, he did not take it directly to Elisha. Interestingly, he did not want Elijah to see that he had 2 servants helping him haul silver and clothing back from Naaman. Verse 25. But he went in and stood before his master, and Elijah said to him, "Whence thou comest, Gehazi?" And he said, "The servant went nowhere." And he said to him, "Went my heart with thee when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? It is a time to receive money and to receive garments and olive yards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and men servants and maid servants." And that didn't say it is. It says, is it a time? So the question is it a time for this to happen? And the thing is, Elijah's heart sunk because he saw what was happening with Gehazi. And he felt so bad about it. But this man did something that he should not have done. He was a servant of the mighty prophet Elisha, and he chose to take terms into his own hands. And so you guys all know what happened. Verse 27, "Leprosy, therefore, of Naaman shall clean up unto thee and to thy seed forever." And so Gehazi went out from Elisha's presence a leper, white as snow. It is so sad when we think about what happens sometimes with people. What happens is constantly we are running towards the Lord and doing what we possibly can. We're trying to be good stewards, and I truly believe that Gehazi, for year after year after year, was a fine steward. He was doing the will that the prophet told him, which was the will of the Lord. But we go to the New Testament and we find out that, all it takes is just something to get us off track. And it's very hard to get on track again. If you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27, when Paul was talking, he said, "But I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." What is he saying? He's saying that the Gehazi event is not uncommon. It is something that can happen to everybody. It can happen to anybody. It can happen to a preacher. It can happen to an elder. It can happen to any leadership or any individual. Because even though we as humans know what we're supposed to do, we so often fall in the trap of doing what we ought not to do. If you go to Romans chapter 12, Romans chapter 12 says, "I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I do hope that Gehazi repented. And of course, when you are sent away from the master, as he was, because Elisha was the prophet, the master on earth at the time. When you're sent away from the master and you're sent away with a debilitating disease, I would think that would cause you to reflect, especially if that disease is passed down through your family. And so when we think about our master, the Lord Jesus Christ, we definitely do not want to be sent away, because that debilitating disease is an eternity without him. So, with that, my advice to you is to read the Scripture daily. Do your absolute utmost best to not falter. And may God go with you. Good day.